Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to have this panel today. My name is Adi Martinez Roman. I am co-executive director and co-founder of Right to Democracy with my colleague Neil Ware, who is in the public right now. And we are so thrilled to have guests from 4 of our 5 territories, 4 woman activists, great um, uh, um, persons that have been in the forefront of the climate struggles that are being faced in the U.S. territories. We have, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves shortly, but we have Imani Daniels from the Virgin Islands. We have Muñeca de Oro from the Northern Mariana Islands. We have Sabina Perez from Guam. And we have Judith Conde from Vieques of the archipelago of Puerto Rico, but I have to be very specific. And we have our translator, Larry Schultz, also here available to help us in this conversation today. And why do we did this panel in Right to Democracy? Well, climate justice has been a very important theme in the US territories. And the main reason, of course, is because the territories are islands. All of our territories are islands. And uh, the warmth and the warming of the atmosphere has affected us immensely. Not only of the effect of the warm sea in our uh, life, in the sea life around the islands, but also the sea level rise and also the increase of disasters such as hurricanes, that they become more strong and big. We also had long periods of droughts that are strange. And then sometimes we have this huge amount of rain falling over us and our land cannot handle it. So there are many ways in which the warming of the planet and climate is affecting. But more than that, being islands that are governed under this colonial legal framework, our voice and our participation in the decision-making processes of climate policies or climate decisions that are made that affect the environment, policy decisions of what it's made over the environment, it is affecting us directly, with us not being able to participate directly in this decision process, in the fashioning of solutions and programs. And for me, that it was evident after we got hit by hurricanes Irma and Maria in the Caribbean, where we still have 7 years after still struggling in our process of recovery with policies that really do not respond to the needs of our islands. And I work directly on that. When Neil and I started Right to Democracy, and during our dialogues in the territories, we discover how important climate change was as a theme in our work. Also, in the summit on US colonialism last October, we were able to gather with people, more than 50 people of the 5 territories, and we all decided that an axis where we could surround the conversation on the legal colonial framework was the theme of climate change. So this activity is just the beginning of a conversation between territories. It is, like I told the participants, It's meant to be a relaxed dialogue, nothing too formal, between powerful women that have been on the forefront and that can illuminate us on what is happening in their territories, challenges, solutions, etc. So welcome. And I'm going to pass the word to, let's see, I have here Imani. Imani, please just introduce yourself, your experience in this area, and just tell us something you want the public to know about the Virgin Islands and your place of birth.
Awesome. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Addie. So I'm a native Virgin Islander. I'm from St. Thomas. I'm rooted here ancestrally. This used to be Arawakan Taino land. Now it is the United States Virgin Islands. And so I just want to give respect to everyone who has come before us as we now have these conversations about decolonization. So I run a consulting firm. We focus on impact maximization. We're just rooted in goodwill, equity, mission-driven collaborations. So I think I ended up on this panel and in this field of work because of the 2017 hurricanes Irma and Maria that, went straight over St. Thomas onto Puerto Rico and then up to Florida as well. So I think we have a lot of shared experiences. The storms hit when I was 24. I feel like I kind of grew up professionally in this disaster recovery realm. And so when I was 25, I was appointed the first executive director of the St. Thomas Long-Term Recovery Group. And so we adopted and really adapted and got like a lot of heat for it. The FEMA's National Disaster Recovery Framework. And so as Addie was mentioning, there's a lot of just like policies that don't advantage us and that advantage the colonial power. And so we did a lot of resisting. We used as many of the resources as we could to rebuild homes, build community gardens, set up micro solar systems. Solar systems, wow, that sounds great. But just like little microgrids for energy. And we managed a bunch of volunteers and did this pretty much for free. And so I am really excited to be here. As you said, it all intersects at climate change and capitalism and the ways in which we are existing in this land. So happy to join this conversation of awesome women. Thank you.
Thank you, Imani. Let's go now to the Pacific. Sabina, can you please introduce yourself? And please tell us something that you want the public to know about Guam.
Hi, good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are. Yes, so thank you for offering me this opportunity. So currently I'm a sitting senator in the Guam legislature. I've been here for 3 terms so far, and I oversee the environment, revenue and taxation, labor procurement, statistics, research, and planning. Prior to becoming senator, I was involved in decolonization efforts. I think back in 2006 or 2005, we organized a delegation to go to the United Nations to basically restart the efforts for Guam to get out of the non-self-governing territory list, which basically is the colonies list. And so because in light of the huge militarization that was happening on our island with impact so great, and so fast forward to today, now we're seeing those huge impacts. We're seeing the destruction of forests, the destruction of our cultural sites, which are integrated to our ecosystems, effects of our water policy, our energy policy. So it has huge impacts on how we live as a people today and how we sustain ourselves. As you may know, Guam, the indigenous people have been here for over 3,000 years, and we've been able to sustain ourselves throughout that time. And in a matter of 1 generation, from my grandfather's to my mother's generation, it switched from an agrarian land-based policy to a capitalistic policy where now people have to go and find jobs, which they were underpaid, basically. They were, for every dollar that American was paid, the Chamorros were paid cents on the dollar. And so, it's this control of our island, both economically, resource-wise, is really creating poverty conditions for the people that live outside the fence. Yeah, happy to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina. I don't know if I'm having issues with the internet or is Sabina cutting up? Did everybody hear her fine? So it's me. Okay, good. So everybody heard her fine. If you guys have trouble hearing me, please let me know. Because we live on the island, so internet is always, electricity is an issue. So yes, we are always struggling with these things. Okay, so let's go to the neighbor, Northern Mariana Islands. Muñeca, can you please introduce yourself?
Havere tiro guahusi maniaca dioro Guineas Las Marianas Giantalo Pacifico Familian Kotla Calvo Zezis and Lazaruzu. Hello everybody. My name is Muñeca Dioro. I am from the entirety of the Marianas archipelago. I'm a daughter of Guam, but have been living in the Northern Mariana Islands for the past 3 years and have a long-standing relationship with the other islands and have familial ties to the islands of Rota and Saipan as well. And I am the co-executive director and co-founder of an organization called Micronesia Climate Change Alliance. And along with Sabina, I have been doing work around demilitarization and decolonization of our archipelago for, gosh, almost 15, 16 years now, since my first child was born. I'm a mother, I'm an educator, and a longtime activist for climate justice and for Indigenous sovereignty and rights. So much of the work that Micronesia Climate Change does is uplifting traditional ecological knowledge as a solution to the climate change. We've done a lot of work just last year in the post-typhoon recovery of Typhoon Mawar. It was the first typhoon in almost 2 decades that directly hit Guam, and our community was really devastated. And of course, those impacts aren't felt equitably. And so we were helping the most vulnerable in our community, such as our elders who rely on diabetes, and getting them some solar chargers for some of the machinery that keeps them alive at night. We were doing things like also helping to clear their yards because they aren't physically able to. And we centered a lot of our work with migrant communities as well on Guam who are from the other islands and who didn't have access to FEMA because they're not US citizens, and who didn't have a lot of the same resources available to them. We ensured that they had language justice and got a lot of support around interpreters and help connecting them to other federal resources and local resources that were coming out in the wake of the typhoon. But we do so much more than just that. At Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, we're also a part of really amazing national networks like the Climate Justice Alliance and Global Grassroots Justice. We've been able to attend 3 UNFCCCs or COPs, where we have been the voice of the Marianas and really shouting out the solution that war is equal to warming, and that we really can't be addressing the entire global crisis of climate change without seeking peace and without demilitarizing the entire world, because as most people might know here, the US military is the largest consumer of fossil fuels and one of the single largest polluter on the planet. And right now within the climate protocols, there is no provisions to regulate military emissions, nor is there any need for them to draw back. And so that's a ginormous oversight on the global community. And that's one of the things that Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, along with many other communities within the Marianas and organizations across the states like Hawaii that are also facing hypermilitarization, have been uplifting. And especially now with what's happening in Palestine, we need to uplift all the more the need for peace and the need for decolonization.
Thank you, Muñeca. Amazing. And we're going to go more into the challenges that everybody is facing. I just want to emphasize to our English speakers, or to all of our speakers, to please speak slowly so that the interpreter can catch up and really translate every word that you say. So, Judith Conde, querida, gracias por estar aquí. Por favor, preséntate al público. Sí. Creo que vas a tener que poner el sonido en la computadora. O uno o los dos. Ahora.
Ahora, ¿me
Ujú.
escuchan?
Sí.
Sí, déjame ver. Hola, ok, ¿me escuchan? Sí,
Sí.
he tenido varios desafíos hoy. Bueno, gracias por esta oportunidad. Soy Judith Conde Pacheco de la Alianza de Mujeres Viequenses del archipiélago de Puerto Rico. Y quiero destacar, ¿verdad?, del archipiélago de Puerto Rico, porque hace 33 años que me fui a vivir a Vieques, ¿verdad? Soy original del sureste de Puerto Rico, de Patillas, Puerto Rico. Así que una de las primeras cosas que quiero compartir con ustedes es que cuando llegué a Vieques no tenía mucho conocimiento de la situación que estaba pasando la comunidad en relación al impacto que estaba recibiendo la comunidad viequense de parte del ejército de los Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? Había un cuerpo militar, unas maniobras que se realizaban, que se estaban realizando allí. Yo llegué hace, le digo, 33 años, pero había pasado más de 60 años que la comunidad viequense había sido expuesta a todo un evento, unos ejercicios militares. En 1999, con la muerte de David Sanes, en el caso de las mujeres viequenses, tuvimos una gran preocupación cómo este tipo de actividad militar estaba afectando nuestras vidas. Por tanto, nos organizamos como mujeres para aportar desde las voces de las mujeres cómo esta realidad de la presencia militar, de este impacto, ¿verdad?, de esta imposición colonial de los Estados Unidos a través de la presencia militar había afectado nuestras vidas. Así que la Alianza de Mujeres Viequenses es una organización que este mayo cumple 25 años de estar presente en la comunidad. Cuando comenzamos nuestros trabajos como mujeres a ver cómo nos afectaba esta presencia militar, nos dimos cuenta de todas las intersecciones que tenía el trabajo de las mujeres y cómo se había afectado la vivienda, la salud, la educación, la transportación, las oportunidades de desarrollo económico, no solamente para las mujeres, sino para toda la comunidad viequense. Así que a partir de ese momento, nosotras hemos estado atendiendo diversos asuntos en términos de el cambio climático y del impacto ambiental. Ciertamente, una de las, además de lo que está ocurriendo actual en Vieques, se duplica y se triplica el impacto de todos los cambios que tenemos ¿verdad? Climáticamente hablando, porque tenemos un territorio que fue ciertamente devastado por maniobras militares. Así que sus aguas, su suelo, su aire, toda áreas, ¿verdad?, de recursos naturales, de árboles, de bosque, fue quemado, fue deforestado. Así que esos son algunos de los retos, ¿verdad?, que nosotras hemos estado hablando. Hay muchos desafíos, pero la Alianza de Mujeres Viequenses ha seguido trabajando, posicionando y llevando las necesidades de la comunidad viequense en distintos foros, y en este momento lo que estamos haciendo como organización es cerrar la brecha con nuestras mujeres más jóvenes, porque sabemos que este trabajo no cesó con en el 2003, cuando ya se dejaron de lanzar bombas y hacer actividades militares, este trabajo no ha cesado, así que seguimos presentes atendiendo muchísimos de los asuntos que tienen que ver con el militarismo, con el colonialismo en la isla de Vieques, la colonia de la colonia, y a su vez de los temas ambientales que ciertamente afectan distintas áreas de nuestra vida cotidiana.
Gracias, Judith. Y quería, Judith, sí, para continuar contigo en estos momentos, que abundes, porque ya comenzaste a hablar sobre estos retos que han tenido en Vieques y también Vieques como parte del archipiélago de Puerto Rico. Que profundices un poco más sobre cuáles son esos retos principales que ustedes están viviendo en estos momentos debido al cambio climático, pero también qué lecciones han aprendido. Quiero combinar esas dos preguntas para todas. ¿Qué retos están viviendo ahora? Pero qué lecciones valiosas que ustedes han traído, porque ustedes vienen de unos retos anteriores, están utilizando para enfrentar esos.
¿Me escuchas bien? Es que te oí entrecortada, ¿me escuchan bien? Mira, ciertamente, como ya mencioné, ¿verdad? Hay un daño, un impacto que tuvo nuestro territorio, nuestra casa, como le llamamos a Vieques, como resultado de las actividades militares. Sumamos a eso, Vieques está en el paso de los huracanes, ¿verdad? De todos los huracanes que pasan a través del archipiélago, básicamente las islas municipios de Vieques y Culebra reciben inmediatamente la fuerza de los huracanes. Hemos estado expuestos, aunque no parezca, ¿verdad? Hay asuntos que tienen que ver, hay algunas áreas con inundaciones, sequía, erosión costera. Entonces, esto tiene implicaciones sobre la calidad del agua en Vieques, tiene implicaciones sobre los abastos de alimentos, tiene implicaciones sobre los recursos, cómo se afectan los recursos marinos tan importantes para la comunidad viequense, no solamente para el proceso de alimentación, sino que es una actividad económica que ha sido ciertamente impactada por los cambios climáticos, más toda la historia, ¿verdad?, de impacto ambiental que le antecede, resultado de las maniobras militares. Entonces, eso nos ha llevado a nosotras a mirar, y digo a nosotras, a la Alianza, pero a un sinnúmero de colectivos y de organizaciones viequenses, porque esto no ha sido trabajo solamente de la Alianza, sino un sinnúmero de colectivos viequenses que están atendiendo estos desafíos. Por ejemplo, el desafío de acceso a alimentos y de seguridad alimentaria que tiene implicaciones, volvemos, ¿verdad? A nosotros los alimentos nos llegan a la isla grande, de la isla grande tienen que llegar a la isla nena, en tiempos, ¿verdad?, difíciles, huracanes, y otros procesos, los problemas de transportación. Cuando ha habido problemas con el sistema de transportación, se incrementa la escasez de alimentos en la isla. Así que son muchos factores sistémicos externos que inciden sobre la seguridad de alimentos. Eso a su vez tiene implicaciones para la salud de los viequenses. Actualmente, ¿verdad?, es de todos conocido que Vieques tiene una de las mayores incidencias de cáncer en todo el archipiélago. Y podríamos, ¿verdad? Hay distintos estudios, hay distintos trabajos que han vinculado el pobre acceso a alimentos de la comunidad viequense, ciertamente la contaminación recibida por más de 80 años, y digo por más de 80 años, porque aunque cesaron las actividades militares, el proceso de limpieza actual que se llevan no es otra cosa que acumular artefactos militares, bombas, y son quemadas y obviamente esa contaminación ambiental regresa a nosotros a través de un proceso de limpieza. Entonces, no hay tal cosa como una limpieza, ¿verdad? Y eso está teniendo sus resultados en la comunidad. Así que nosotras nos hemos ido acercando a estos temas reconociendo y dándole participación a las mujeres y a la comunidad a expresar cómo se sienten, porque una de las cosas que nosotras hemos aprendido en este proceso es que en el caso de las mujeres responsables de la salud, de la alimentación, del cuidado de los suyos, cuando sienten que hay una amenaza sobre su familia, particularmente a veces no piensan ni siquiera en ella, sobre los suyos, hay estudios que demuestran que están más dispuestas a participar en espacios comunitarios y a defender lo suyo. Sí ha sido importante potenciar la voz de las mujeres porque también se nos ha hecho creer que este trabajo de cambio climático, de ambiente, de contaminación, le corresponde a los académicos y a los científicos, pero también nosotras hemos, ¿verdad?, insistido sobre las mujeres. Tú tienes algo que decir. Desde el espacio cotidiano, desde el espacio de tu hogar, se desarrollan unas prácticas que ayudan al ambiente, ¿verdad? Que ayudan a mejorar. Así que de la misma manera que ellas asumen liderato y control y toman acciones en su espacio pequeño, en su casa, en su comunidad, sirve para el resto de todos. Por eso la metáfora de Vieques es nuestra casa fue la consigna o la metáfora que nos permitió traer al escenario comunitario, al escenario público, no al privado, a las mujeres para empezar a hablar sobre estos procesos ambientales, este cambio climático. Sí hay asuntos que nosotras como mujeres podemos atender desde el espacio privado, pero ciertamente le corresponde al Estado, al gobierno y a un sinnúmero de agencias asumir el liderato para establecer políticas públicas, para establecer programas en defensa del ambiente, de las comunidades y de su gente. Entonces, una de las mejores lecciones que nosotras hemos tenido es buscar ese espacio de encuentro donde las mujeres puedan sentirse cómodas, no amenazadas en traer cómo podrían participar, cómo podrían accionar en favor del colectivo, sabiéndose ellas también, ¿verdad? Parte de las soluciones para enfrentar los problemas que tenemos en nuestra comunidad.
Eso es excelente y súper inspirador. And I'm going to switch back to English to approach Imani, because I'm going to keep it on the Caribbean because I see there is like a parallelism between the experience of the archipelago of Puerto Rico when like right by, like not even like a 15-20 minute flight, we have our brothers and sisters from the Virgin Islands, like Imani said, Taino origins like us. So it is an archipelago that has been united really for centuries and centuries until colonialism divided us literally. So Imani, can you please talk about, and I suspect it's gonna be a little bit similar, but the challenges that you guys are facing, or you girls, women are facing in the Virgin Islands right now, and the most important lessons that you have learned in this trajectory.
Definitely. Thank you. I am always inspired by our brothers and sisters in Vieques and Culebra. I wake up and I see Vieques and Culebra every day, unless it's super rainy like it is now. So hi from across the water. Oh, yeah.
Talk
Sorry.
slowly, honey. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yes. So the challenges, very similar. From a natural resource standpoint, climate change standpoint, droughts, erosion, you know, the droughts are killing a lot of our livestock and crops. We're seeing the same food insecurity, doing a lot of work there to try to promote local farmers and really save our agriculture industry. It's also just really hot here, right? We're dealing with a lot of extra heat. Most recently, a few months ago, our students protested because it was just too hot in their classrooms to focus and learn safely. And it's winter, right? So like imagine what happens over the summer months as well too. The warmer temperatures are leading to higher acid levels in the ocean. We're dealing with this thing called the stony coral disease, which is wiping out what I think is our most important natural resource, the coral reefs, right? Because of our fisheries and the health of the ocean. And also like not just that there are more hurricanes and more powerful, but we're dealing with rapid intensification, right? So we're going from you get a tropical depression warning to a Cat 5 in like 2 days, when you used to be able to track them on paper over like a week's time coming off the coast of Africa. So that's been really hard to deal with. I think the biggest challenge though is losing our people, right? Like we're seeing just mass exoduses off the island, and I just can't even express how devastating that is for our economy, our society, politics, right? And the people who are leaving are the people who are able to leave, right? Who either have the money to leave or family somewhere else or are globally competitive. And so the people that we still have here in the Virgin Islands are simply trying to survive. And there's very little that we can ask of people who are just focusing on surviving. Like we just give as much grace as we can, but it really does stagnate how much we can do as a people, right? I think, you know, because of COVID and the hurricanes, we lost like 25 or 20,000 people. That's 20% of our population, right? So now we have a lot of young people, a lot of elders, and a very small working class. And you know what that does to a society. But I will say some of the lessons learned, I've been doing a lot of like thought in this. So I've developed my own theory of change. It has like 8 principles, but some things that have worked for us are focusing on gathering your people, building mental fortitude within your people, shifting power, usually through resources like money and labor, amplifying the right voices, storytelling, like thinking of a qualitative, indigenized way of collecting and sharing data, not just like the numbers that the federal government cares about. Building impactful infrastructure that's like regionally relevant, using blue skies, that's a disaster management term. So like if we aren't in an emergency, plan, coordinate, collaborate when you do have some like blue good sky days. And then of course, just don't do it. Like we all have to hold ourselves accountable to deeper values and find a different way to do things instead of the status quo. And so I often look at things through like these 4 levels of impact. There's individual, right? There's the relational between people, institutional, which is like organizations and, you know, government level, and then structural, right? So the structural is kind of the global definitions of who wins and who loses. And I think a lot of us sit at the intersections of a lot of these disadvantages and these losses, right? And so thinking of how these different levels of engagement work has been transformative to our work, right? Because it's not just pushing something forward, but really being strategic about how you engage the individual versus politically versus globally and structurally as well. And then just some other like lessons learned, you know, Virgin Island solutions for Virgin Island problems. Simple. Getting just direct cash to people, specifically women, because we know what happens when you fund women of color. The whole community benefits, right? Practicing circular economics. We don't have the privilege of throwing things away after one use. What can we make here? What can we reuse here? What can we compost and dispose of responsibly here, right? Having access to clean, accessible data to develop baselines and drive action through data, where I think the colonies are left out of a lot of federal feasibility studies, and that makes it really hard for us to justify needing more resources. So taking local control over data, I think, is really important. And then collaborations, within our communities, but then also regionally. You talk about the Puerto Rican art, but I always say if they gave us Puerto Rico to Anegada, including the British Virgin Islands, that whole arc, we would be the most powerful country in the world. Natural resource, beauty, eco-agro-tourism, just that whole arc that has all these colonial lines in it, but really looking at your regional partners that might not be American, but we're stuck in region 2, so we always get technical assistance from New York. Not the best. If we could get like some Dominicans up here, or bring the Bajans up here, who are dealing with similar things, I think collaboration goes a long way. And then the last thing that we learned that we are promoting through our work is prioritizing internal labor, building internal capacity, raising Virgin Islanders to solve these Virgin Islands problems. We often, just because of our size, we ship in contractors, we bring in outsiders, and it's created this level of dependency that we can't afford financially, socially, or politically. And so thinking multi-generationally of what it really means to raise a group of people who can solve their own problems. So those are just some of the lessons learned. Again, I think we all have very similar issues, but that's what we've been focusing on lately.
I really appreciate it, Imani. I think you gave us like a little small master class on the cycle of attending to climate change, climate justice. So that was amazing. Thank you so much. And there is this familiarity of situation between Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands because they are one archipelago, like they are the Mariana Islands. They're all together. Were separated by conquest, by colonialism. And I wanted to have Sabina. Sabina, can you please tell us about the challenges that Guam is facing right now and what are being one of the most important lessons? And then we move to Muñeca.
Yes, thank you. So, and listening to the two women, a lot of it resonates with me, with Judith's story about, the experience with the militarism. And, that really is a big part of what we're responding to. So right now, the US EPA is about to come up with a final rule for PFAS, right? PFAS is the forever chemical that causes a lot of health impacts and that are found in many munitions. And so when we talk about, clean water, clean air, the military has huge impacts to our island. And, if I can also add, they have a huge voice, but yet they're not elected by our people. And so that's really, a problematic when we're talking about, colonialism on Guam. And so, yeah, these chemicals, I knew some of the predecessors of Judith that, really fought against what they would do is they would blow bombs in Vieques, right, as their way of getting rid of the bombs. And so in that process, they were releasing all those contaminants. And so as a senator, I introduced a bill to stop open burn, open detonation. It passed last term, but it was quickly overturned this term. And because of the impact of the military's voices on our elected leaders. And so they actually kept the ban of open burning, but they overturned the open detonation. And so what I was trying to do is to phase out open detonation so that Guam can access the technologies that exist that can limit the exposure to open detonation. And so when we're talking about the huge military buildup on our islands, especially with now the threat of China, threat of North Korea, we're hearing that there could be a war as early as 2025 because China's interest in overtaking Taiwan. And so with that comes a huge militarization of our region, including Guam, who has no seat at the table when it comes to making these huge decisions. And so, as far as environmental policies, it's very difficult in this type of atmosphere to advocate for ourselves. the environment that which is going to support us against climate change. So, we see, military bases. We have the first Marine base being built. And with that comes the destruction of our forest. And I was part of this effort before becoming senator to prevent the deforestation. And there's this one particular area that was very critical. It wasn't a critical habitat, but might as well be, because it had one of I guess the only mother tree. It's of a very rare species called the Cereanthus nelsonii. And there's only 30 some trees left in the wild. They exist here in Guam as well as in Rota. But there was only one mother tree left. And so the military plans were to destroy the forest that supports it, that protects it. And so they did it. They destroyed that forest. And now after Typhoon Mara, it's not doing too well. And we're hearing that it might be on its way out. So, we're talking about climate change and militarism. We're seeing everything come together on our islands. It doesn't stop there, right? As far as clean water, clean air, when we're talking about blowing up open detonation of military weapons. And, we were hearing that, 45% or more of weapons consist of PFAS. And so how do we protect our people when we don't even have a seat at the table? I think this is really critical.
That is great. Sabina, do you want to share like an important lesson learned? I mean, I can derive from what you said a couple of them, but if there's any other that you want to before I move to Muñeca.
Yeah, so in my place, my perspective, we're still in the middle of it. So I really appreciate Iman's list. Definitely would need to take that master class. But yeah, I think, really, I guess the lesson really is to keeping on, right? Because, once we say, we can't take it anymore, we can't continue, then, the destruction will continue. So I really believe that, yeah, it just seeing the little wins, if there's any, taking heart in that, and being in this forum is very helpful, because I think it's important to share, the struggle and the successes. So, and any insights as well.
Yeah, and we'll definitely share the information. Actually, there is questions in the chat about sharing resources on the environmental and climate justice situation in the territories. And this is part of the reason why Right to Democracy does these conversations and forms the coalition to work on these issues. And Muñeca, please, I know you have been doing so much work with the Micronesian Climate Change Alliance. If you can tell us about what are the challenges faced in the Northern Mariana Islands and the lessons that you've learned.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm so grateful to be a part of a panel of such wise and really activated and motivated women leaders who are really pushing for change and really encouraging our communities to be more resilient in all the ways possible. And that's very much what we're trying to do here in Northern Marianas, as well as Guam and beyond, and the rest of Micronesia with Micronesia Climate Change Alliance. But yeah, here in the Northern Mariana Islands, and a majority of my work in activism has been based on Guam too, has been around the militarization of our islands and just really uplifting the connections between militarization and the climate crisis. It is such a hard conversation. Sabina and I know very well how hard it is to approach our community about the issue of militarization, as we've almost all of our colonial history has been tied to militaries. Even with when the Spaniards were here 500 years ago, majority of the missionaries that came were Jesuits, who were like the army of of the Catholic Church at the time, and our entire relationship with the United States over the past 120 20 plus years has been a military relationship, both in Guam and here in the CNMI. So in the CNMI, the 2/3 of the island of Tinian are leased out to the military, and the entire island of Ferran de Mendaniza, or the Chamorro name is Noos, is used as a military target range for airstrikes. And so these activities of using our weapons are using our islands as target practice, and militarizing our natural landscapes has been very much part and parcel of the political experience and the social experience of the people of the Northern Mariana Islands. Of course, our islands in the Pacific were heavily militarized and sites of major battles during World War II as well, between the Japanese imperial forces and the U.S. government. And we still to this day find unexploded ordinances, sometimes in very close relation to schools. And so the toxic legacy of militarization, as Sabina said, with PFAS and with things like UXO and just the contamination of our lands, is something that is so present. My partner has familial lands in the village of Talafofo here in Saipan, which was a military dumping ground that hasn't been cleaned up or remediated yet. And this is an experience that many Chamorro landowners have across the islands, where the mess is identified, the surveys are made, but then they run out of budget to clean up. And that's definitely something that needs to be addressed, even though we have been identified for a lot of water contamination like PFAS. There isn't testing done on a wide scale, and there isn't any community testing. So we really don't even know how widespread PFAS is. And of course, our agencies who are working hard to do the testing to inform our community are also very much understaffed and don't have all the skills or the labs needed to process these tests. As well as with the militarization, these agencies are the regulatory agencies. So they're also having to respond to all the permit requests associated with militarization. And that in and of itself is a huge task in which they're burdened with, and that there isn't enough personnel or people to respond to just that, let alone the historic testing, and let alone letting our communities know about all the different contaminations that may threaten our livelihoods. Both Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands do have high rates and incidences of cancer, both associated with the toxicity and the environmental degradation of our lands, but also with lifestyle, with colonization. I'm sure we face throughout the territories with the change of our diet, with the change of our of moving from the agrarian system and subsistence living to being reliant on almost 90% of the food that we eat, has definitely impacted our health, both mentally and physically. And so much of the work that we do also at Micronesia Climate Change Alliance is to uplift our native food systems, to return to agroforestry, and to really promote food sovereignty and security. And another thing too is just really wanting to push for renewable energies in our islands. We are very, very far from any oil source, and we're very, very reliant on fossil fuels at the moment. And our governments need that pressure from our community to really push the envelopes for renewable energy, which is not accessible equitably across our islands. Right now, I think on Guam, you have to be a homeowner to qualify for to get any sort of renewable energy to your home. And the cost of housing, mostly associated with militarization, is incredibly high on Guam. Most people can't afford to rent, and we really rely on our families to support us. And many people in my generation, and I know that Imani spoke to this too, leave the islands because it's just too expensive to live here. We have the cost of gas and groceries and everything has gone up, but our wages remain stagnant. And so economic justice and is definitely tied to the militarization of our islands and the ongoing colonial experience. And really, of course, this is all tied to our relationship with the United States and not having our own ability to create new economic systems, to create even our own measures of environmental protection. Right now, most of what we follow is US EPA, or even with agricultural laws, we follow US Department of Agriculture laws, which don't always make sense for our communities and our environments for small islands. And they promote things like monoculture and things that just don't work for us and are not regenerative in the ways that our ancestors have lived and stewarded our lands. So some of the lessons that I've learned after being an activist for so long is really the importance of rooting myself in my ancestral knowledge and rooting myself and trying to nourish myself as best as I can, and in the foods and grown and caught here in our waters, and really just taking time to really be appreciative of how beautiful and how sacred my lands are, and really wanting to make everyone remember that as well, and not be so tied to the consumer culture of the United States.
Thank you so much, Muñeca. And I feel very identified, even though the challenges are a bit different because of the high level of militarization being so active right now in the Marianas, in Guam, and in Northern Mariana Islands, in both. And but like you just said something that was exactly like what happens here. Policies not applying or not really being good for us, like the I have the word in Spanish, monocultivo. I don't remember how to say in English, but yes, and being forced by insurance companies to only grow one type of crop, because if not, you won't get insured if something bad happens, a drought or something, if you combine your crops. So that type of like stuff that is just so hard to figure out, right? The policy. And I have a couple of questions here that I want to attend, and I want Muñeca and Sabina to take turns on answering it, because we recognize how, and I'm gonna combine, I like to combine how militarization in the industry of the military brings an economy to the territories that is important, and also jobs, and it makes the conversations around the impact on the environment and climate really difficult, even with regular people, community members, like how to address that, right? And there's two questions to people that had that question, and I think if you can tie it to what government or policy makers should really, what would be one thing that they should do to attend to the challenges, at least one or two, because I know there could be like a big list, but one or two things that policymakers or government need to move to in order to attend these challenges. Whoever wants to go first, Muñeca or Sabina, you're welcome. And then I'll move to the Caribbean.
I could start first. So I think that's a really important question, because it is true. This perception that militarization brings economic gain. And the perfect example happened during COVID, right? So when first COVID came to Guam, there was a ship, USS Theodore, I believe is the name, that came to Guam, and there was this decision to bring the military soldiers on into the civilian area, into our hotels. And so not knowing how, how contagious this disease was, um, the decision was made because to support the hotel industry, right? And so that that is, I think that story says a lot of things because we're willing to sacrifice the health of our community over the um, economics. And so that's kind of like what the position we're being put in. But, like I said, if we have a seat at the table, we can create our own terms of how we want to develop our economy and not have to deal with being afterthought in this. And also, there's this myth that the militarization is making Guam rich, which it isn't. A lot of these contracts are being awarded to companies that are off island. And so the billions of dollars that are pouring in are probably leaving island, most likely leaving island. So, what we're left with, like Maneka said, is, more of the negative impacts. There's huge speculation for building, properties here in Guam. People are buying up properties, residential properties. And so it really makes it unaffordable for the people living here to pay rent. So part of the reason is because, or even if they don't purchase properties, there's this overseas allowance where those that are serving in the military are given a stipend of, I believe, $1,200 or more a month. And so a lot of the realtors or the people that are that own properties are now wanting to rent it out to military people. And so the local people, the wages are not, doesn't keep up. So it's very difficult for a family to pay for a property of that level. If you're getting paid minimum wage of $9.25 an hour, it's you can't compete against a military renter. And so and the rate at which these properties are being rented, so it doesn't stay on for very long. These properties don't stay on for very long in the market. So it's very difficult for locals to compete against military renters. And so, yeah, the cost of living, it does not, or at least the housing definitely is not geared toward our local people. And when we talk about having to build more affordable housing, there's not enough contractors on Guam. And they're basically attracted to the contracts on base, which they can get millions of dollars versus $100,000. Building $100,000 home right now, the price of homes have increased. I think before, when 10 years ago, it could have been, I think the average price was 200,000. Now we're seeing 400,000, and people who want to make a profit, I hear homes are 700,000 now. So it's really putting a lot of hardships onto our community. So yeah, sorry, I kind of lost train of thought, but yeah, I got,
It's okay.
yeah, it's
No,
just,
no, no.
yeah. And then of course, the protection of our resources, generally, like, for instance, the energy policy. I introduced a bill to ban nuclear energy here on Guam for the production of power, generation of power. And it's interesting to see that a lot of negative response was from our agencies. We did, even the Guam Environmental Protection Agency didn't say they were against it, right? Because federal policies, federal law supersedes a lot of our local laws. And one of the things federal policy says is that the states, at least the Supreme Court, at the Supreme Court level, it states that jurisdictions cannot, I guess, my understanding is they cannot, object to safety issues. What we can object to is economic issues when it comes to nuclear policy. So, this idea of colonialism, how it's impacting our control is deep seated and broad. It's very broad in how we can really live our lives to the way that we that can reflect that reflects our values.
I've identified with so much of the stuff that you just said. The increasing prices of housing, it also happened here in the context of disaster recovery, COVID recovery, all the people leaving the islands of Puerto Rico, and prices increasing, and also the all the issues that you were talking about, nuclear energy being pushed in Puerto Rico instead of rooftop solar. There is so much stuff that we share. It's incredible. And Arturo Garcia Costas in the comments says, I have to encourage every one of us to join the Island Strong Climate Network, which I definitely do. Most of you probably know what it is, and you should join. And I will do the question that you have, Arturo, but I want to give Muñeca an opportunity to answer. You were kind of smiling, Muñeca, when I was saying that, what should government do, or what would be a policy decision that would actually help. But, I am a, optimist. So what is your opinion about that?
Yeah. I think I would say the same thing to head of state as well as a local legislator, that this is the time to be bold and to be brave, especially as leaders. We have so much against our own descendant happening against our own descendants, that we really need to be good ancestors, and every decision that we make on a personal level and a political level really needs to be aligned with restoring good, just relationships with Mother Earth and with other people. And we really need to zoom out and see how these systems and these structures that have very much harmed women for centuries now, and are the same structures that have very much harmed Mother Earth as well. This economic system based on extraction and on exploitation needs to come to an end, and we need brave leaders to do what we can to speak truth to power and to not be cogs in the wheel of the war machine. And so one of the reasons why it's so hard to talk about militarization on our own islands is because we have such high enlistment rates. Not only are our sacred lands, waters being sacrificed for the military, but so are our people's bodies. We have such high enlistment rates. Both Sabina and I were both teachers in the Guam public school system, and I also here with in my public school system, and the majority of our students join the armed forces. And I really hope to give our students another avenue of being able to provide for their families and for themselves in a way that is more aligned and more just, and that is regenerative with Mother Earth. And I think that now is the time for us to be really dreaming big and really wanting to shift the entire global population, starting from our islands and returning to ways of our ancestors, in that we were living within our means, but also within our means meant being able to travel the world on our canoes. Like we see our ancestors and their technology as so backwards and archaic, but in many ways they were geniuses and scientists and innovators in their own right, and provided for our people in a way that was really beautiful, in a way that wasn't harmful, and in a way that wasn't giving us things like cancer or having widespread mental health issues. And so I really would want to encourage our leaders to zoom out, have a and encourage them to have a really long memory. We so often in this modern age only remember 1 or 2 generations at most, and we forget the thousands of years of struggle, but also of thrivingness that we've had to endure as a community. And being out here from the Marianas, where we were strongly matriarchal and matrilineal, I think also returning to women in leadership and empowering women to be the solution bearers and to be the cultural bearers of a new way forward is incredibly important as well.
Thank you. Actually, that's one of the things that you did was mentioning in the very beginning, you know, how returning to woman is kind of like returning to our roots, right? Because women are the carriers of care and culture of the ancestors in many ways. So thank you for that. And I'm going to go back to the Caribbean, to Imani and Judith, to please to answer the question of what would be the one or two requests of policy and government action that needs to happen in order to address problems. I know, and Imani, you have an assignment to share that list with everybody, because everybody's asking for it in the chat. And also Arturo has a question that I really appreciate, which is, have activists considered a class action lawsuit to force the federal government or the Department of Defense to devote sufficient resources to clean up after themselves in the Caribbean and the Pacific? And I know there is something happening that Judith is going to share with us, but if any other of you want to share, please do. Who wants to go first, Judith or Imani? Go ahead, Imani, and then Judith. So she has to switch this.
Okay, great. I just want to highlight that part that Sabina was bringing up, that it is a widespread lie and myth that the colonies benefit from being colonies. I also just want to highlight that the act of decolonization is not going to be easy or fun, but a certain generation is just going to have to take that hit, right? And so I see other conversations in the chat about what it means to be economically viable while resisting, and both might just not happen at the same time, right? Like we might have to like really lose economic security to forge a better path so that there can be actual sustainable security later. And so this idea that like it's going to be like easy and soft and we can transition, I think we have to like unlearn that. Like we're in a very hard place. It is very like do or die for us in the islands. And so Monica, I appreciate you suggesting that, you know, our elected leaders need to be bold. Like this is not a time to play colonial games, right? And so just something I also wanted to talk about to this point about like collective lawsuits and things like that. So the second biggest oil refinery in the Western Hemisphere, it's one of the largest in the world, exists on St. Croix. It's the Hovenza Hess lime tree debacle that has completely poisoned the south side of St. Croix. I was just there last week driving by. It's like you're out of like some dystopian, futuristic, the world has gone wrong movie. And it just literally exists on the south side, and it has been poisoning the people of St. Croix for decades. The EPA has come through. They've cleaned up all sorts of poisonous chemicals like nitrogen, ammonia, things like that have seeped into our water beds. I mean, up until I think maybe like last year, there were still reports and people are doing studies of this, but it's such a slow justice movement, right? They've been poisoning us for decades. And now it's like, okay, it's kind of a trendy thing for the EPA to come in, talk about cleanups. There was a huge settlement as a result of the closure in I think 2011 or 2012. I would love to see some literature on what actually happened, how it actually advantaged people of the Virgin Islands, because in my understanding, and when speaking to Crucians, it didn't, right? And so just wanted to talk about those two things, but can you remind me of the question that you actually asked, Addie?
No, you actually addressed it. It was about what type of policy change you want to see. So you kind of address it, but if you want to add something else, you can go ahead.
I will just add quickly, right? So we were talking about the levels of engagement, and this is just not where I sit in passion or in purpose. So I'm sure other people have like great suggestions, but the structural level that has us as like poor Black second-class citizens does not then make me believe that there is like really easy, meaningful policy that's going to help us in an environmental justice conversation or a climate justice conversation, which is really just racial, women, age, ableist, like all of these intersections is really what we're talking about through the lens of climate. because it is like knocking at our door, right? And so I also think that our politicians need to be incredibly aggressive, right? I think the policy is like, how do we get out of this colonial thumb? Where does the conversation of reparation come in? And what is the like 50 to 100 to 250 year vision look like for each of our areas, right? And so Arturo, hi, good to see you again. I saw that you put in there that like region 2 isn't a bad region to be a part of. I was kidding. But I do think there's some validity into like a remote region, right? Like why are the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, you know, even like Alaska being incredibly remote dealing with some of these issues, the Pacific Islands, like why are we not a region, right? Like we keep like having these same conversations and it's like, let's just get it on paper. This is where we're starting. These are the points of consensus. And now what are the creative solutions that we have? So I think really just like thinking outside the box, not like trying, one of my colleagues says that the way we're doing equity now is like you have a blueberry muffin that's like a plain muffin already made, and you're just like shoving raw blueberries into it. And it's like, no, let's just go back and bake something new so we can have like a really nice, I should use a tart as an example because that's like culturally creative, but I think that's it. My policy recommendation is that we focus big on changing how we relate to the global structure. And then from there, we create something better.
I love the metaphor of the blueberry muffin because I see how it's so good. I was in a conference on racial equity, again, insisting on the intersections of colonialism, climate change. If you want to talk about racial equity, democracy, so definitely it feels like we're shoving in stuff in a blueberry. And that we actually need to create something new. And it's kind of parallel to what happens in philanthropy too, on the way they fund actions in silos and when we are, you know, trying to deal with something that is so systemic, right? So no, thank you for that. Judith, ahora contigo. Quiero darte la oportunidad de contestar qué tipo de política pública quieres ver del gobierno, pero también contestar esa pregunta que hizo Arturo sobre ese pleito de clase, porque sé que ustedes están llevando uno muy interesante que quiero que compartas con el público.
Voy a empezar con lo último que mencionaste, ¿verdad? Con el proceso, ¿verdad? Nosotras como organización y varios residentes de Vieques radicaron un caso por violación a los derechos humanos de los viequenses como resultado, ¿verdad?, de la presencia militar y de todo lo que ha supuesto esto. Este caso se radicó hace 10 años en la Comisión de Derecho Internacional, una comisión de Derecho Internacional, a lo mejor Adi me puede mencionar el nombre correcto. El asunto es que tomó 10 años en que fuera admitida ¿verdad? Este reclamo que nosotros hicimos en términos de violación de derechos humanos. Así que hace el agosto, septiembre de este año 2023, finalmente fuimos notificados que se aceptó el caso y entonces ahora estamos en un proceso de negociación, ¿verdad? Y una de las primeras cosas que nosotros estamos solicitando es que el gobierno de Estados Unidos admita la violación de derechos humanos a los residentes de la isla municipio de Vieques, que la Marina de Guerra de los Estados Unidos también admita, ¿verdad? La implicación que ha tenido para la vida de las y los viequenses su presencia por más de 80 años. Así que este proceso ha sido bien interesante. Es importante decir, tomó 10 años. En este periodo de 10 años, varios de los demandantes fallecieron, así que ellos no pudieron concretar. En el caso de la alianza, reunimos nuevamente a las mujeres y a la nueva generación de las mujeres para, en términos de compensaciones que ellas entendían necesarias en este momento para atender asuntos, ¿verdad?, de Vieques, pues así lo presentamos, lo trabajamos con nuestra abogada, la licenciada Anet Martínez. Hicimos una lista de posibles compensaciones para el pueblo viequense, que incluye acceso a servicios de salud, mejores oportunidades educativas, que incluye en el carácter individual algún tipo de compensación a los individuos que presentaron la demanda. También estamos hablando, escuchaba a las compañeras, garantizar el acceso a vivienda en Vieques. Uno de los mayores retos que tenemos en este momento es el desplazamiento de los viequenses, ¿verdad? Antes, en un momento dado, antes no, hace en el 40, de la década del 40 al 50, al 60, la comunidad viequense fue expropiada, fue desplazada de sus tierras por la Marina de Guerra de los Estados Unidos. La comunidad fue arrinconada o puesta entre medio de dos espacios militares. En este momento salió, cesó el bombardeo, pero igualmente la comunidad, el departamento de guerra pasó al Departamento de Interior, muchos de los terrenos de Vieques, así que casi quedamos en la misma estructura, ¿verdad? No necesariamente los terrenos pasaron al pueblo viequense, dándose la situación que estamos en el medio, como decía la compañera de Guam, mucha gente especulando, mucha gente con dinero desplazando a los viequenses, y la realidad es que en una comunidad que ha sido tan expuesta, que sigue teniendo un alto nivel de pobreza, si es un desafío cuando tú no tienes acceso, no tienes recursos económicos, no tienes la posibilidad económica, es real que llegue gente a ofrecer dinero, pero eso ha supuesto desplazamiento, ha supuesto el concepto, ¿verdad? Gentrification, la separación de unos y otros. Ya vemos en Vieques unos espacios muy particulares de una gente que se ha apropiado de nuestras comunidades. Así que el proceso legal está dándose, estamos en ese proceso de conversación o de negociación en términos de política pública para Vieques. Mira, hay ¿verdad? Este contexto de archipiélago, pero el gobierno de Puerto Rico, el gobierno de Estados Unidos ha dejado, ¿verdad? La legislación en muchas ocasiones se piensa en función de la isla grande y muchísimas veces excluye a Vieques y a Culebra de los procesos. Entonces, para nosotros es bien importante que los legisladores, las personas a cargo de hacer proyectos de política pública y leyes en las distintas áreas del archipiélago, tiene que tener esa mirada integral, esa mirada del archipiélago. No puede excluir a la gente de Vieques y Culebra, y más aún, a mí me parece que es fundamental que en el proceso de diseño, planificación, evaluación de medidas que vayan a incidir sobre la vida de las islas municipios, es obligatorio, debe ser mandatorio que haya representantes de la comunidad viequense. En ocasiones hay esta representatividad que se traduce en una persona para, ¿verdad?, decir, ellos estuvieron presentes, tuvimos una voz, pero en realidad no hay atención plena, voy a llamarlo de esa manera, no hay atención plena sobre lo que esa voz de las comunidades, ¿verdad?, de Vieques y Culebra están presentando en la mesa de trabajo. Así que a mí me parece que una de las cosas fundamentales que nosotros necesitamos es esa presencia de las y los residentes viequenses en las mesas de trabajo para proyectos que impulsen desarrollo económico, acceso a vivienda, mayores oportunidades educativas, mejor acceso a salud. Hoy nosotras conversábamos de la idea y lo hemos planteado en los últimos 20 años, que en lugar de nosotros salir de la isla, haya la posibilidad de construir en función de que gente pueda venir a Vieques a estudiar ciencias ambientales, a participar de procesos para manejar temas que tienen que ver con cambio climático, profesionales de la salud que puedan venir a hacer unos internados a la comunidad viequense, o sea, que venga gente, que pueda entrar gente a nuestras islas y en función de un sistema que conecte al archipiélago, fomentar mejores oportunidades y acceso de salud, de transportación, de vivienda educativa para todos. Esa es nuestra meta, ¿verdad? Que haya una mayor participación política de los viequenses en las tomas de decisiones.
Me encanta, Judith, porque estás hablando de la participación real, ¿no? Y me encanta también porque tú traes una perspectiva, como tú dijiste al principio, de una colonia dentro de una colonia. So, es una burbuja que refleja lo que pasa al nivel superior con Puerto Rico en relación a la gobernanza de Estados Unidos sobre Puerto Rico. Una sola voz no es suficiente, simplemente estar ahí, ¿verdad?
Es que es el caso exactamente, que es esa voz que tenemos allá, pero es una sola voz.
Una sola voz, ¿verdad? No, y dicen, con eso cumplo, ¿no? Porque estás en el cuarto. Así que no, voy a cambiar inglés. Definitely, the discussion of Vieques is very valuable for us to understand how there are these levels of lack of participation and agency in the territories, and how it is reflected not only at a level of the relationship between the territories and the U.S. government or the U.S. armed forces, but also within our territories, relationships between local government and local communities and between communities. So definitely it's very important to see those levels. And we're on time. We have to go. There is in the chat too, I think, and I left it there because I think it is important. Maybe Imani, you can later address the question about because it is a question that keeps coming up on how the refinery created all these jobs so much. It was a huge economy, and now it's gone and it's left everybody in despair because there is no job, so they have to leave and everything that it the dystopia that it creates, right? So and how do you balance these two things, right? The need for jobs and climate. And I think it's an important thing that I think then when you did your list and you share your list with us, if you can also attend to that, and we'll share it with the participants. And also there is this desire from RTD participants like Nisha Christian Hendrickson. She is telling us, what resources do we have? How can we get together these resources that can give us more information on how climate justice is playing out in the territories. So please, 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 if you have any resources, you can share with me. Also, it will help me in my class on climate change and colonialism that I'm giving in a few weeks in the University of Puerto Rico School of Law. I will also be able to share it with the participants, and also it can feed the work that the coalition to confront colonialism that has been created after the summit, and that we are working in here with RTD and other participants might be interested to gather that information too and share it. We have an education committee led by Jessica Samos from the Virgin Islands that is working on gathering educational resources in between the territories. Again, everybody, thank you so much. It's 8 o'clock here in Puerto Rico. That means that it is 10 a.m. in Northern Mariana Islands and Guam. Thank you of tomorrow, because they live in the future. So we have to be really listening to them. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. I think this has been wonderful, and we all identify between each other for what is happening in the territories. I'm going to be in contact with you for further conversations and activities. So thank you so, so much.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you.